So let's start with this. So do make me think. I'm going to talk to you about 3 different things in the course of this 15 minutes. First of all, how wonderful our life has become by using modern technology. Secondly, it's about how we've created and manipulated user behavior, how we've changed user patterns in using mobile phones, and the expectations, the high expectations that come with them. And sometimes that's not necessarily a good thing. And the last thing I'm going to talk to you about is how we can adopt some counterintuitive thinking to overcome some of those problems. Now, the first thing I want you to do is not particularly easy. I want you to cast your mind back 20 years. So we're not even at the millennium, and Bill Clinton is president of the US. Now, 20 years ago, when we wanted to do something, whether we were applying for something or whether we were purchasing something, what generally tended to happen is we needed a black pen and we needed a piece of paper. It was a printed form, and we'd have to use block capitals. We'd have to take time, we'd have to concentrate on applying to join a library or a gym or applying for a bank account. There was a lot of information that was required. We had to give ourselves a little bit of quiet time so that we could concentrate and make sure that we didn't make any mistakes. Because after we'd put in our name and our address and some employment details, if we made a mistake 3/4 of the way through the form, you couldn't use Tipp-Ex. You couldn't just cross it out. You'd have to throw the whole thing away and start again. It was painful, but actually it had drama to it. We knew it was important. We knew that we had to concentrate. Even the folding it up and putting it in the envelope meant that we were making a bit of a drama out of this thing. It was important, and we needed to give it the time that it required. Now, it's not quite the same today. Today, everything is so much easier. After I've had a hard day at work, I like to go down the coffee shop. I like to get myself a black Americano, sit down, and just give myself a little bit of quiet time. Now, in that quiet time, I get my phone out. And whilst I'm using my phone for a lot of different things, I might be checking on the news. So I'll open up my BBC News app, see what's going on in the day. I might want to check my bank account just to make sure I've got sufficient money in there because I've got a bill I've got to pay, and I'll pay the bill. I might want to download an album, which I've heard recently, so I'll go to the iTunes and I'll download an album. I might go to Bloomberg, something like that, just to check how stock's doing, and then I might go into my stock app so that I can dump some stock that's not doing particularly well, or potentially purchase something to add to the portfolio, which I think is in the future is going to do pretty well. And I can do all of this before my coffee has got cold. I'm sitting there, I'm tapping, I'm swiping, I'm tapping, I'm swiping. It's easy. And it's interesting, even to the point that I can go onto my bank app, I can have a look, see how much a loan is going to cost, and potentially even apply for the loan and still enjoy my coffee, not have to worry about too much. Now, all of that is down to people like us, UX professionals, designers, programmers, even our clients. We've created this dynamic. We've changed the process so that consumers can now go to their phone and be able to undertake pretty much anything they wish to do in a relatively short space of time. We've modified, we've manipulated the process to make it fit. We've used structure, we've used icons, we've used color, we've even used visual affordance. All of the things that we can throw into the mix, we've used to change the way the process is. But we've also changed the user. We've changed their expectations. They've built learned experiences through the multitude of different apps that they've used. They have much higher expectations. When you go onto a phone now, you expect to be able to complete something quickly and easily. But sometimes this feels a little bit less important. I'm using my phone to apply for a loan. Where's the importance in that? Where's the drama in that? I can apply for gym membership in 5 taps using my phone. Why can't I just apply for a bank account using 5 taps? Why does one have to be harder than the other? So not everything should be easy, but actually, I want to use the study that I'm going to show you here to maybe suggest that not everything should be easy. Now, this is under an NDA, so I can't show you the details of it, but suffice to say it's for one of the largest global banks out there. Now, this is a global study that's been going on for a period of time now, and not just concentrating on one product, but concentrating on a number of commoditized products. But there's been thousands of hours spent on one-to-one depth interviews with consumers in the UK, the US, and all over Asia to find out how they feel about using their phone to apply for and open up relatively commoditized products like loans, bank accounts, mortgages, etc. We're going to concentrate on account opening just for this short part of the presentation. So, we created a process which was about 5 steps long, where you put in your name, your address, your personal details, your contact details, your employment details, etc. Followed all of the perceived wisdom in creating an application process on a mobile app. It was simple, it was short, it was easy for consumers to get through. It looked good, but it was failing. And it's worth looking at some of the reasons why it was failing. It looked like every other application process you should do, but some of the things that were there were causing major problems. It was error-prone, there's disorientation and frustration. And this was essentially created by the fact that when consumers enter into a process on their phone, they are very task-focused. So they want to get to the end as quickly as possible. They're in completion mode. I'm not going to pay too much attention to everything that's going on here. I've got a bit here on the form I need to complete. I've got a bit here on the form I need to complete. And that's what I'm going to concentrate on. There's detail blindness because you're going through this process. It's like, yeah, I'm going to put my name here, I'm going to put my address here, not really paying attention to all of the information that's contained on the page itself. And you've got very selective attention. So you tend not to see everything that's around, you're just looking at the one piece of information that's right in front of you. What we were doing to make the process 4 or 5 pages long is that we were squeezing, we were condensing, and the condensation of information onto a single page was meaning that lots of information, lots of detail that was there to help the consumer was essentially being missed and swiped past. We've all done it. We see that constant movement on the phone, up and down, up and down. Oh yeah, I need to do this bit. You miss other information contained within it. So skimming past data was causing an enormous problem. What looked simple was actually becoming complex. And what should have been quick was really starting to become slow and stilted. We needed to find a solution to this problem. Well, why? And this is because we've concentrated on some of the wrong things. We were giving people what we thought they wanted. We were concentrating on completion time and conversion funnels, and if we make it too long, people will drop out. Let's make it nice and short, let's make it easy for people to complete. Also, it's a commoditized product. Everyone knows what a bank account is, so why should it be difficult? The trouble is that we minimized, optimized, simplified, and condensed so much that actually what it was doing was confusing consumers. Consumers have learnt that actually using your phone, you put minimal engagement in for maximum reward. Now, you can do that when you're buying a book off of Amazon, and you can do that when you're applying to join a gym, but not necessarily do that when you're applying for something that is really quite important, like a loan or opening a bank account. Speed actually isn't of the essence. What you need to do is start to make people think. Now, of course, Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug, it's the one book that everyone in this room should own. I'm not suggesting for one moment that this shouldn't be read and shouldn't be digested and thought through completely and utterly. In fact, this helped create the industry that many of us are already in. The teaching isn't wrong in this book. The guidelines are all there. It is the first rule of his UX guidelines, which is don't make me think. There's nothing wrong with that. But actually what we find out is that the implementation has gone wrong. I think many designers, I think many UX professionals, and I think many clients have kind of got carried away with the message. Let's make things quick and simple, and let's not have people think. That's what's creating the problem. We don't want zombies. Not everything should be easy. We do want people to think, because that gives us informed decision making. Now I just want to look at this very simple equation. We've got interaction cost is equal to the physical load and the cognitive load. I want to use one example to try and show this to you. When you learn to drive, a very simple activity, but actually the interaction cost of learning to drive is really high. There's an enormous physical load because you're trying to remember where the accelerator is, where the clutch is, what the handbrake does, and so forth. But there's a massive cognitive load as well because you're concentrating on traffic and pedestrians. You're looking in a mirror. You're trying to work out how the clutch works with the accelerator. All of these things are going on in your mind, which makes driving very difficult when you're starting to learn. Once you've been driving for a few years, actually the interaction cost of driving is minimal, to say the least. You've got muscle memory, which teaches you don't need to think about anything about the actual physical part of driving, but also you're not thinking about the traffic. You're noticing it. But to the extent that you're singing along to a song on the radio, you're talking to your partner, and some people even use their phone whilst driving. That's a bit dangerous. But the point is that the interaction cost comes down because you've learned all of these things. Now, the short process that we had with this large global bank actually had a really high interaction cost because the physical load was small. We were using interactions that everyone would know about and understand. There was no problem there. But the cognitive load was massive because there was so much information condensed onto these small pages that people were missing information, misunderstanding information, and trying to figure out why they were doing certain things at any given time. What we needed to do was to create some control. So what I did was present a hypothesis, which actually was counterintuitive to the client themselves. I stated that what we should do is make the process longer and we should make the process harder. Now this meant the client looked at me with a very strange look indeed. Why would we want to make something harder and longer? Well, what we needed to do was create friction points in the process. So we made the process longer, and within that process we created certain friction points which meant that the consumer had to stop. They had to think. They got instructions, but they couldn't get past that page until they'd engaged with the information. Now, although it's counterintuitive to do so, what we found was we reduced the error rate, we gave the consumer a much higher level of control, and actually at the end of the process, there was a much higher level of contentment as well. To make the stakes even worse, we had trialled this in Hong Kong. Now, consumers in Hong Kong are a pretty tough audience. They don't really pay attention to anything that's going on phones at all. But they actually really found this to be advantageous. What we were doing was messing with reality. We had reframed the conversation. What we were saying was that short didn't necessarily mean good. What we were saying was that complex didn't have to mean it was going to be difficult. And most importantly, we wanted to say that longer didn't mean slower. And this is where the perception of time came in. Everyone who undertook this hadn't seen the shorter process before. But when they got to the end of the longer process, they all said, that was easy and that was quick. It wasn't actually taking much more than a couple more minutes to complete it than the shorter process was. But because they were in control as they went through, it felt quick and simple. There was a good experience, and it influenced their perception. In essence, we'd increased the friction in the process, making it longer, but we'd reduced the cognitive load because people didn't have to think about what was going on. We were telling them why, how, and what they had to do. So they were in control throughout. So at the end, we'd reduced the interaction cost quite dramatically, which gave them the perception that everything that they had gone through was a lot quicker, even though it wasn't. So longer doesn't mean slower. And maybe that's the real meaning of don't make me think. What you have to do is make people take time without realizing that they are taking time. Now, this was an experiment to test a hypothesis that I put in place. Fortunately, it's actually worked. So I'm not suggesting that Amazon should get rid of their one click to buy a book, because some things should be easy. Some things don't require a great deal of thought. But some things that we do on our phone are far more serious, and they require informed decision making by us, the consumers. It's our job as UX professionals and designers to bear that in mind and try and make sure that consumers are making the right decisions and are not making the wrong decisions because they're clicking and swiping and tapping on things too quickly without consideration or understanding the consequences of what they do. It's our job to not try and make everything short and not try and make everything simple. Sometimes it's our job to make it a little bit harder and a little bit more difficult for them, but without it feeling that way, because we pay them back with through those friction points with greater information and an ability for them to really engage and understand what they're going through. So sometimes longer doesn't mean slower, it just means better informed and a higher contentment rating from your consumers. That's essentially it. This is a case study, right? I can't tell you too much detail about it, but I would be interested to hear from any of you if you've had experience of trying this, or whether you're on this drive to try and get through to complete things as quickly as possible, and whether that pressure is coming from the clients, or actually, is that being driven internally? Is that something that we think we want to do without regarding sometimes the consequences that that could be putting on the consumer's shoulders? So if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
There's some time if anyone wants to ask anything, you can.
Yes.
Hi. So my question is, this hypothesis, do you think it would differ for someone like a millennial versus someone who's a little older? Because us, like millennials, have a really short attention span, and they do want things to be done quickly.
Well, it's an interesting point, and we talk about millennials as though they're sort of alien beings. Now, I'm not a millennial, quite obviously, but I don't believe that millennials use phones in any different way to anybody else. So I won't see 50 again, but I use my phone quickly. I go from page to page. I don't pay the attention I should do on occasions, and I think most of us in this room are in exactly the same way. It's not defined by age. It's defined by experience and how you engage, the number of apps that you engage with. Someone who's 60 may be on their phone all the time, and they're just as fluid and quick and don't pay the attention. Whether you're a millennial, whether you're an older person, or whether you're in the next generation beneath millennials, it doesn't make any difference. What we have to do is try to ensure that any decision that you make online is the decision that's best for you, not one that's prompted just because it was quick and there's a button and I'll have it. How many times have we ordered the wrong book off of Amazon because we didn't pay quite enough attention to the process? Because there was a television program on, having a chat with my partner or whatever it might be. So this isn't about age, it's about experience with the device. We're all capable of making bad decisions or ill-informed decisions because we didn't pay enough attention. And I think it's just making sure that we select the right processes to make that little bit harder and to add friction to, rather than worrying about the age of our audience. Yes, question over there.
To add friction to these flows, can you give an example of friction, type of friction?
Okay, so it was very common to see consumers skim past information which was really essential to the process they were going through. We were talking about here opening up an account. So it could be about getting a credit check. So an agency, a third-party agency, will go off and do a credit check on you. Lots of people don't see that message. They don't realize it's there. When they try to move past the page, then they get an error. Now they have to look through the page to find that information and agree or disagree with it. Now that's unplanned for friction, and that frustrates people. If the page prior to having that information on, there was either a warning message or the credit check information is on a very separate page to the information that you filled out. So this is all that's presented to you, and you've got to agree to it. That's a friction point, because you've broken the process up. You've slowed someone down and forced them to engage with the information. But it's for good reason, because it gets rid of error, and it makes sure that the consumer recognizes, okay, I'm going to get a credit check on this. Have I done any credit checks in the last 3 months? No, that's all good. Now I feel better informed. That's just an example, but there's many times when information like that may be asked, and it's for good reason to try to keep the consumer informed, so that when they reach the end, it didn't feel like that was longer. It didn't feel like you'd separated that out of the process. You just put it straight in front of me, and because I'm in a rush, it was much easier for me to see. So that's just an example of how you can add, and when I say friction, it's not a massive friction point because they weren't obvious to the consumers as they were going through, but it is a designed friction point rather than trying to slip it in and hope no one notices, essentially.
So one more thing, I have a DMAT account opening thing, okay? I work in a company which has a similar kind of process, opening a DMAT account. And opening a DMAT account is not an easy job. There are lots of documentations around. So we usually have seen that we try to skip some documents when they don't have it. And then maybe at the end, summarize keys, there are a few things which are missing. Is this a better option to do it?
Well, no, I mean, it's always better to keep the person informed before they get into the process. Yeah. So if they're going to need to provide 3 months of salary information, and if they need to provide a letter with their address on, tell them before they get into the process. If you put that there, some people forget, right? So just before you're going to request that information in the form, have another page which just says, now's the time to get hold of your wage slips and your letter because you're going to need it in the next page. Little gentle reminder, no one's going to worry about that. It's not going to think, oh, for goodness sake, I'm going to get out of this and go to another one, because they're going to ask the same questions. But it's just a gentle reminder, now you need it. And don't forget, most forms now are doing photographic upload, so you don't have to go into the branch, but now I know I've got to get that piece of paper because in the next step, I'm going to be taking photographs of them. Great, so I'm informed.
We do this in another way where we actually tell them, this is needed, but you can skip it now and do it at the end. So maybe they'll be ready for it before he ends.
And that's fine, but by the time you get to the end of the process, they may well have forgotten, or may well have moved to the kitchen whilst they're doing this, and the forms are in the front room. So, oh God, now I've got to go and get them again. So there are points where you can, there's lots of different ways to skin a cat, right? All I'm saying is make sure that you use the opportunities to do so. So there's no such thing as a surprise when a person gets to that point in a process.
Typically, job boards have a very catch-22 situation. If I limit the number of applications for a job based on only the criteria given for the job, I will have very few applications. So we tend to allow everybody to apply for a job on any job board. Okay.
So you're talking about a job application,
yes.
Yeah?
Do you think that it's a good idea to keep the bring in a friction point when somebody is applying for a job when he's not actually eligible for the job?
Well, and that's a smart form essentially that you're going to have to put in place, because if you're asking for certain criteria, now you're looking at AI almost to be implemented to actually read through the previous elements of the form for them to actually say there's no point going any further because actually you're not best suited for this job or you're overqualified for this job.
Right.
That's moving on to a whole different realm, and fingers crossed we get to that soon. Okay. That's brilliant, because essentially you may be frustrating the consumer at the point where they say, I really wanted to go for it. I know I'm not quite right for this, but I really wanted to go for it. Yep. But you're saving them time in the long run, and that could be a good reflection upon the brand itself to say, yeah, they were right, and I didn't waste my time. I've got 10 minutes of my life back. I can go and do something more interesting. Right. So you can certainly do that. It's whether there's sufficient technology available right now to allow that to happen.
Okay. Okay, fair. Thank you.
I think I may have used up my time. Is that about right? Oh, look, there's one more question. Go on, let's squeeze another one in.
When you talk about friction points, there are different devices where the app can be on, say a laptop or a PC or a phone.
Yes, you can
So
certainly do it in different.
do you change the friction points depending on which device it's being used on? Say if you're on a mobile device, you might be in a hurry, so you might add more friction points. But when you're sitting on a PC in your house, you would be more attentive. So would you add lesser friction points?
Yeah,
there?
so this is a case study looking at apps, okay? Now, if you were doing this on a web page, you wouldn't insert an entire page just to say, okay, there's going to be a credit check or whatever it might be. There are different ways, different design elements that can be incorporated. There's nothing wrong with light boxes and so forth to keep the consumer informed. You would structure the page differently if you were looking at the desktop than you would do on the app. The reason for concentrating on the app is because it's the one that's most prevalent for people to be skimming past, because you just always constantly on the move when looking at a page. You think there's less information on the page, therefore it's going to be easy to focus on. But actually, consumers don't focus. They focus more when using a desktop. Even though there's lots of distraction, there's a smaller field of vision, but actually there's more concentration. And people use the desktop sometimes because it is more important, and therefore they want to sit down, and it's almost like filling out a piece of paper. So I would say you use different visual devices, you use a different approach, but still friction isn't a bad thing if it's a particularly important form that needs to be concentrated upon. Just to ensure that those with less experience recognize the enormity of a bad decision, because that could have a major influence upon economics for them on their personal life for years to come. So it is imperative, but you look at different devices in different ways. All right? Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.